dribble in. Welcome to this presentation, the Developing Partner section on building a book of business. We have a very exciting program for you today. I've been looking forward to it all year, and so I'm very eager to get into it. But before we do, a couple of things. One is an announcement that the next networking event for the DPS is going to be January 29th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern. More information to come on that. And the executive committee is going to be meeting in, there's Eker, in late January to evaluate the programs that we've had this year. I think we've had some great programs, and certainly those programs that were best received, we'd like to continue along those veins and avoid the things you don't like. So if you have any feedback about the events you've attended this year, please feel free to give it to Bree or to me. We're creating content for Primaris by Primaris. So since this is a hybrid networking substantive event, and since we are sort of on the bubble of a few enough people to allow for short introductions, I think we're going to do that. And I don't want to take too much of our hour and time away from our panelists to do that, but I will ask for a name, firm name, location, and primary practice area. And I will go first. And I will also ask for your apologies because your screens are getting very small for me. So if I butcher your name, blame it on bad eyesight. So I'm Ryan Billings. I'm the chair of litigation at Kohner, Mann, and Kailas in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I do a lot of business-to-business litigation in a broad spectrum of areas, but it clusters around quite a bit of non-compete, trade secret, fiduciary duty, and dealership work. Why don't you go next, Dan?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Perrin. I'm an IP attorney with Wiederman Malik in Melbourne, Florida.
Thanks, Dan. Joe Davies.
Afternoon, everybody. Joe Davies with Smith Dubnam in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I primarily do commercial litigation.
Thanks, Joe. How about Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Newell. I'm at Birch and Cracchiolo in Phoenix, Arizona. I primarily practice employment litigation.
Thanks, Aaron. Ileana?
Hello, I'm Alana Linder. I'm with Manley Burke in Cincinnati, Ohio. I do primarily general civil litigation, but our firm has a national fraternity and sorority client base, so I do a lot of insurance defense work in that regard.
Thanks, you, Alana. Jesse Schmidt.
Hello, Jesse Schmidt. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio with McNeil Schick, primarily insurance defense practice, anything from general liability to construction and professional design professional defense.
Thanks, Jesse. Adam.
Hi, all. I'm Adam Waske. I'm an associate at McCullum D'Amelio Smith Eubler in Wilmington, Delaware, and I primarily practice in corporate and commercial litigation, primarily in the Delaware Court of Chancery.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to skip over our panelists. How about John?
John Pierce with Gordon Rada Montgomery Barnett in New Orleans. My practice is primarily energy and environmental law.
Thanks, John. How about John H?
Hi, John Hemingway with Bivens and Hemingway in Tampa, Florida. I'm a trust and estates attorney.
Michael.
Hey, good morning. My name is Michael Kvistad. I'm with Beresford Booth in overcast Edmonds, Washington. We're near Seattle. And I practice mostly in corporate and real estate transactions.
Thanks, Michael K. Michael S.
Mike Smith from Cardelli Landfear in Detroit. We predominantly do civil litigation, defense work, a lot of insurance defense and corporate clients.
Michael. Jackie.
I am Jackie from Trevelyan and Horse in Atlanta. I am a commercial real estate associate, and up until Monday, a large part of my practice actually was the CTA. So
Sorry about that. Thanks, Texas.
Yeah.
Jason.
Yeah, Jason Newman with Cardelli Landfear in Troy, Michigan, partners with Mike Smith and do defense civil litigation.
Eker.
Hi, everyone. Iker Diegues, Cachot Cavazos and Newton, Mexico, business law.
Ralph. You may be having connection issues. If for whatever reason you can't talk, feel free to.
Hi, everyone. My apologies. I'm on the road. I'm driving, so that's why you can't even see my picture. But I'm Raf Sauti from Malawi. I'm running Sauti and Company. We are a law firm that provides various services ranging from civil, commercial, litigation, transactions, and various services to corporate institutions. And we are based in Malawi and Africa.
Thank you, Ralph. Jess Waltman put his information in the chat because he can't go off mute. Understandable. Jen.
Hey everyone, Jen Colson with Krevel and Horst in Atlanta. I do business litigation, employment law, education law, and I represent a lot of lawyers and law firms. So thanks y'all for putting this on.
Thanks, Jen. Lance.
Hi everyone, Lance Meyer, O'Mara Wagner in Minneapolis. I primarily handle insurance coverage matters in Minnesota and the surrounding states.
Thanks, Lance. Klaus.
Hello, everybody. Klaus Oblin, attorneys at law in Vienna and Frankfurt as of 1st January next year, which is in 3 weeks. We're doing cross-border disputes, that is commercial litigation and arbitration.
Thanks, Klaus. Randy.
Yeah, hi everyone. Randy Savrinsky with Demarest Law Firm in Royal Oak, Michigan, and primarily practice in the areas of business, real estate, and estate planning.
Thanks, Randy. Mark.
Hi, Mark Warzeka with Wiederman Malik, and I practice intellectual property law, transactional, and litigation.
Thanks, Mark. Fred.
Hey, Fred Joes, Louis Joes in New York. We pretty much cover all the bases with various practice groups. We won't do matrimonial. Other than that, we cover it all.
Good choice. So I'll turn now to our panelists. And since I am very confident that they won't spend a lot of time talking themselves up, I will do so by noting that these are some of the best lawyers that I know in Primaris and outside of it. So I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. And let's start with Kylie. Why don't you tell us just a quick summary of your career, 10,000-foot view from law school to today?
Sure. I was one of those folks who did law school at night. I worked full-time during the day and ended up landing a clerkship that I was able to do full-time during the day my second year of law school. I ended up working at that firm for 6 years between pre-law school and after, doing plaintiff side medical malpractice work. Tried to find my way after that, a couple smaller firms that mostly focused on the plaintiff side work, either employment law or personal injury generally, and then landed at Ogborn Mihm just over 3 years ago and focused my practice on plaintiff side personal injury, medical malpractice, and kind of anything that can be shoehorned into a contingency fee matter. So even some unique legal malpractice matters, commercial disputes, that kind of thing is what I practice today.
Thank you very much, Kylie. I have about 20 follow-up questions, but I will save you for later. Jerry.
Hi, everybody. Jerry Weitzel. I'm with Kozacky, Weitzel, McGrath in Chicago. Let's see. Law school here in Chicago, similar to Kylie. I got a job in my second year with a firm and was a law clerk there for a couple of years. And then they hired me as a lawyer and worked there for about 5 years doing a lot of mix of commercial litigation and some insurance work. And then bumped into my cousin on the street who was a partner at McDermott, Will & Emery, and he told me about a lawyer from his firm who had left to start his own practice. That's my now partner, Paul Kozacky. That was 26 years ago, and joined his firm and then became partners in 2006. And so I've been at this same firm for 26 years. The firm does basically a commercial litigation trial work, with my practice being a real mix of industries, service businesses, real estate, manufacturing, et cetera. My partner Paul does one more unique area I think that people think of as being unique for Chicago, since we're not on an ocean, but he does maritime law. So we do have a maritime practice as well. So I think that sums it up.
Thanks, Jerry. And if you're just joined and missed introductions, I very much encourage you to drop your name, firm name, location, primary practice area in the chat. And last but not least, Roger.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Roger Barton of Barton LLP. I think most of you know we have an office, our main office in New York City, office in Nashville, and an office in LA. As of Monday, we also have an office in Richmond, Virginia, which we're excited about. My path from law school was, I wanted to be a real estate mogul. I liked real estate. I couldn't do math, so I was a history major. But I figured real estate's like, you can touch it and feel it, and it's not so much about math. So I applied for it, eventually got accepted to the largest real estate law firm in the country, but they hired me into litigation. So I wasn't going to learn the business that way, but I could learn the mistakes. But I wanted to be in that firm and, you know, be surrounded by that, and was told after a year I could transfer it to the deal side. So anyway, I built 3,000 hours my first year as a litigator, worked on really cool stuff. The firm represented small names like Donald Trump and Helmsley and other real estate gangster families that we have in New York that may not mean much to you guys. But it was fun. It was like being in a movie. And I was fortunate in the sense that it was a heavy real estate firm, but I was in the litigation group that did the corporate litigation. So a lot of those folks, Peter Calico owned the New York Post at that time. Trump was running the shuttle between DC and New York. They were all investing in casinos. So there were all kinds of interesting corporate disputes that I learned about. So after my first year, I was like, okay, I'm ready to transfer to the deal side. And they're like, well, we love you in litigation, you know. And I was given a little advice by senior associates that politically you're probably going to commit suicide if you change departments, and maybe you want to change firms. So I knew somebody at Sidley Austin, got an interview there. They wouldn't hire me into real estate either, but they would hire me in the corporate transactions groups. I said, all right, good firm. I didn't graduate top of my class. I didn't go to Harvard or Yale. Sidley wants me, I'm going. So I was there for a number of years and did all kinds of business transactions, which was fantastic. It was a moment in time where Sidley was still a large firm, but the New York office was only 80 lawyers. So I got to work across the different disciplines within corporate transactions. So it was a lot of fun. It was great exposure. I got lucky early on and brought in a significant amount of business. And when the managing partner of the New York office left, who was kind of the glue that held that office together, other partners started to leave. They wanted me to go with them. And I was just like, you know, kind of lucky just to be here. I'm not sure I want to go to a different firm. Took an interview, got a great offer, and then it made me think, you know, still have this itch for business. Maybe it's not real estate, but I could solve it by starting a law firm. So I joined my dad's practice, or I joined my dad. I took up real estate in my dad's firm is probably the best way to say it. My dad had a small plaintiff's personal injury practice, which I didn't want to do. But he had a conference room, and I didn't have to pay rent, and there were computers on the desk, and I could claim we were 5 lawyers, even though it was just me, myself, and I. And said to him, you know, he was getting older. I said, look, if you need help running that side of the business, I'll help you. But I want to build a corporate, you know, corporate litigation, transactions, whatever, business law firm. So I did that. And shortly thereafter, I needed to take over both sides of the practice for reasons I'll bore some of you over a drink. And then in 2011, just got fed up with plaintiff's personal injury being part of the business model, which it never was, and spun that off. And we went, at that point, I was to 7 lawyers. And so from 2011 to now, we've built the firm up to about 45 lawyers, all commercial, half is transactional, half litigation. Within that, we have employment and IP and cyber and real estate. Oh, I still don't get to do real estate. and, other ancillary practices. So that's my path in 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Roger, Jerry, and Kylie. So the good news today is that we've got a pretty large crowd. The bad news is we've extended past the first page, so I cannot see you all. And my suggestion with a group of this size, I very much encourage questions, but please drop them in the chat. I will try to walk and chew gum at the same time, monitoring the chat and asking questions of the panelists. I certainly, for each of you, I'd love to hear the 2 drinks in version of that same story. But today we'll keep it at the no drinks in level. So let me start with Roger, and you gave us, I think, a good synopsis of how you got where you are. Let me ask you this question, and it sounds like it happened a bit organically, but when you put your name on the door and start building a law firm in New York City, which has a gazillion of them, tell us about that process of building a book of business, building a brand for your firm, attracting new lawyers, and basically, being a diamond in the rough in the very, very lawyer-rich city of New York.
Yeah, I think, it helps to be young and naive, because otherwise I probably never would have done it in the way I did it. I was, as I alluded to earlier, when I was at Citi, I just got lucky, and people ask, how do you network? How do you get clients? I brought in a major financial institution that resulted in multi-million dollars of years in fees for Sidley, because the guy that headed the group was my boss when I was a lifeguard. So, it's just that kind of thing, right? So when I left Sidley, that business was not coming with me. I basically went out to every relationship I had, friends, family, schoolmates, and so forth. I'm a good lawyer, hire me. This is what I'm doing. And I was fortunate. There were a number of people who, wanted to help. I had folks who were very senior in their positions that just were kind to me and would call me up randomly saying, oh, I don't know if this is for you, but do you want to do this, sale of a chain of superstores in a major industry? Or do you want to, help this company that's growing and needs finance, whatever it may be. So in the morning, I'm doing an employment agreement. In the afternoon, I'm litigating something. The next day, I'm, looking at a M&A transaction. And I don't know that you could do that in this day and age in New York because people are so specialized, but that's what I did. And I grew it, as you say, organically. I joined a ton of networking groups. I was, eating 3 meals a day with folks, just to be out there. And I got up to, the first year was 400,000. I got close to $1 million in the second year. And, then you start to think about, how are you getting business? What kind of business do you want? What business are you not getting and why not? And what was clear to me was, we had a nice group of small to mid-sized companies, entrepreneurs, and so forth, or maybe pieces of large companies for very niche stuff. But we wouldn't get the big chunky stuff. Or if we got a client that looked like it was going to be the next great, Uber or, pick a unicorn, as soon as they went to go out for financing, the money that would come in was represented by Cooley, Gunderson, pick a big firm. And I'd get the usual speech of, we love you and thank you for everything you did for us, but the money wants us to be represented by their law firm. And, you can still keep our books and records. Thanks. Appreciate that. And so, I thought about it, and this is way before this vogue of lateral hiring was really popular. And I thought, if I could talk to partners who are at larger firms or have reputations, have clients, I can, hopefully attract them to join me. And if I could do that, if you wake up, I hate January, we're all going to face January 2 weeks, right? I hate January 1st because you wake up, you're like, okay, slate is clean, I got to do it all over again. And like, how do you add another $1 million to your business every January, right? And it occurred to me, if I bring somebody in who had, 500, 750, I couldn't imagine bringing someone in with $1 million of business. All of a sudden, not just have you created more revenue, but you have the client relationships, you have the expertise of that person, you could hopefully have some gravitas if they've got a good pedigree. So I did that, and it was super hard. I remember being at a managing partners conference, and Brad Karp, who was still the chairman of Paul Weiss, was asked about lateral hiring, and he was, I don't want to say smug, but really confident in his position that Paul Weiss would never hire a lateral partner. They grow their own. Everyone is devoted to each other. There's loyalty up, down, and sideways. No one ever leaves. This is the best firm in the world. And if we were ever to hire a lateral partner, it'd probably take a year because they would have to meet every single partner and get the approval from every single partner. So fast forward now, that's like 20 years ago. They're all hiring left and right as fast as they can, groups of them, right? So it was a weird concept, but I was able to attract some folks, and it tended to be older partners who had established careers, who were fed up with the bureaucracies of their firms, and were interested in something different, and whatever the magic dust I spread around convinced them to join. And it went along like that for a bit. We sort of reached critical mass when we were about 15 to 20 lawyers. And then Law 360 did us a great favor, and I didn't know this was coming. Somebody called me up a day or two before and says, I think you're going to get written about because I just got interviewed by Law 360. And the article that came out was that Law 360 was trying to identify 10 firms in the country that they felt, quote unquote, was giving big law a run for its money. And we were featured as one of those 10 firms. And that crystallized my thinking. I was no longer going from, we're just a good lawyer, hire me, or we're a great firm and we can be nimble and cheaper and nicer and better. It articulated exactly where we stood in the marketplace. And Ryan, to your question about how do you do it in a crowded market like New York, it actually afforded us the white space, as they say, to do that, because there were all these big firms in New York, but there weren't, high quality, small to mid-sized firms. And Law 360 gave us that exposure. And we just, as the kids say, leaned into it. We embraced it as, that's how we want to be known. And that kind of propelled, the continuation of the lateral partner acquisition strategy. You then get big enough to start thinking about, okay, you've got practice groups. How are you known in certain industries? Who are your clients and where do you go to get more like them? But that's, more or less the path there.
I have way too many follow-up questions to that, so I'm going to pick one. But thank you very much for that. When you mentioned 3,000 hours, I had flashbacks to the start of my career, and it's still too soon.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of the answer to starting in the early days was work your tail off, talk to everybody you can, really put your name out there, get out there and work the relationship. Let me ask you this. Have you found, now that Barton is a very recognized and well-known firm, have you found that the way you attract clients these days, or because of current market conditions, is substantially different than what you did, say, a decade ago when you were a smaller firm?
Yes and no. It's still relationships, right?
Yeah.
You can go to conferences, you can write things, you can do all of that. But the whole end game there is to get in front of somebody and make a relationship. It's easier and a bit different that, we're trying to pitch more and more institutional relationships. Everyone in their practice in some form or another, whether you're a litigator or a transactional lawyer, unless you're doing insurance defense work, you have matters and cases, but you've also got clients. And sometimes, it's the matters and cases are great. They last for a year or two and then they're gone. But it's the clients that you can look at as what I call institutional, where, we know we'll get 10 cases from them this year. We know we'll get 3 or 4 deals from them this year. So there's a emphasis when we're looking to go hunting, how do we get those relationships? And that's something, as we're bigger and better known, we have a better ability to attract, because the first question I would get from those clients way back in the day was, well, we don't know you, so who else like me do you represent? What else like what I want you to do have you done? What are your rates? We don't get those questions anymore. It's little more established, it's easier. But having said that, none of it's easy because you have a lot of competition, and you're always trying to supplant an incumbent firm. That you want clients that use other law firms. So somehow you got to get in there and show how are you better or different, or why is this unique situation something that fits your firm and not the others that they're used to handling.
Gotcha. Let me ask you a somewhat open-ended, perhaps unfair question. If you could go back in time and talk to Roger Barton in 2011 and give him advice about how to do it, or how to do it better or with less stress, what would you tell him?
I would have first said, take some math classes, and when your clients in those early days wanted to form a private equity fund, you should have done it. I think, the part of the benefit was I was doing it myself. I didn't have to answer to anybody, so I could take risk, and I could, try things and fail, or, not have to worry about what a committee of people or other, business partners would think about it. But if I had 4 or 5 folks like me, I started off, we would have been further along the track. So it's hard to do it on your own. The market's a different market right now. I think there's advantages in this market right now. There's been a lot of disruption in the legal industry. I think disruption creates opportunity. So if you can figure out where you fit, that is, it's exciting in many ways. Nashville was an interesting example. When we moved down to Nashville, it's now 5 years, which is hard to believe. It was really hard to get traction, not just because we were small and we weren't known, but that legal industry in Nashville was stuck 50, 75 years ago. It was like all the partners were grandchildren of the partners that founded the firm. Everybody went to the same prep school. They all go to the same church and golf with the same country clubs. Why would they join our firm? And then all of a sudden, Nashville started to look like New York, because the national firms started coming in there and either setting up their own shop or merging with those existing firms. And then all of a sudden, there's disruption in the marketplace, an opportunity for us. We went from 2 to 10 lawyers almost overnight down there. So you gotta have to kind of figure out where's the disruption in the market and how do you take advantage of it.
And what do you see as the greatest threat to the traditional, ways that lawyers have built a book of business that are yet to come? I know some people talk about concern that the accounting firms are going to gobble up market share. There seems to be a new boogeyman every single month. But what do you think is the greatest threat to law firms in the traditional model of book building?
Yeah, I think the biggest threat is also the biggest opportunity, and everybody says it, but it's true. It's AI. Technology, we as lawyers, again, going back to my math issue, I think a lot of lawyers look at technology the way they look at math, and a lot of us don't like to do math. But I strongly believe that we're going to see the most amount of technology come into our industry that we've ever seen in the next 5 years. I think it's going to radically change how we practice. It's going to change how our clients in their in-house departments you make use of and also create their own work product. So, I think the firms that are embracing technology really strongly stand the best chance. I think we are going to become much less hourly wage slobs and more product driven. We're going to start pricing contracts at X dollars, and don't ask me how many hours it took to do it, or we'll handle your litigation for X dollars up to certain ways, because the parts that are hard to price are going to become, I think, the subject of AI. So that's going to change radically our industry, and I think it's going to change radically how you get clients. Clients are going to drive their business to firms that are going to be the most efficient firms using these tools. And all the big firms have teams that are dedicated solely to AI and figuring this out. So firms of our size are going to rent it. We're not going to buy it. We're not going to own it. But I think, you know, the Thomson Reuters of the world and the other service providers that we typically rent our technology from, we need to get close to what they're doing and figure out how to drive it in our business, and then think about our staffing. You know, how many associates do we need? How many paralegals do we need? Should we be hiring people outside the legal industry? Should we go out there and just hire a bunch of geeks who understand technology and we can teach them the law stuff? How do you price that? But I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, and I hope, and this may be optimistic, that the more boutique style firms that populate Primaris might be a bit more nimble in terms of shifting economic models. I'd hate to be a 2,000 lawyer firm and have to go from an hourly model to something else. Imagine there'd be huge growing pains that maybe we can avoid as smaller firms, and maybe that's an opportunity. I guess we'll see. Let's switch a little bit to Primaris and how you have used Primaris. Barton LLP has used Primaris to help grow its business, help market itself to clients, and what you've seen as effective through the Primaris connection.
Yeah. Primaris has been great for us because our target recruit is somebody out of a large firm. So if we're recruiting lateral partners, Primaris has been a great platform to offer them lawyers in 45 different countries and across our country, because they're used to having that kind of offering for their clients and resources. So resources in a platform to offer internally is fantastic. And I don't know, I couldn't even count how many Primaris firms we're using right now, but it's got to be, you know, over 25 in terms of local counsel and collaboration. So that's been fantastic. It's also attractive to our clients where, you know, if a client comes to us and says, can you handle a matter in Delaware? I'm like, sure, call up Tom Ubler's firm and let's go. You know, so we don't have to say no to those kinds of things in terms of getting business. It's been a great, you know, knowledge resource for us because there's a lot of smart lawyers in Primaris and people who have practices that are niche-y and you know, things that we don't come up against every day, but when we do, the knowledge base has been fantastic. I think the events that we do that where we invite clients, the International Summit, is excellent because we get in front of clients, you get to hear, you know, what are they thinking? What are they doing in their law departments? How can we serve them, you know, better? What are other peer firms doing? Because they'll share that information with us, which is always hard to get, particularly at firms of our size. And I think also the collaboration that we have, just even on these calls, like what's everyone doing at their firm? You know, how can we be, you know, taking, you know, best practices into our own firm is super important. The exposure to ACC has been great. So that's, you know, also been helpful. And Bree and Sarah will probably kill me for saying this, but you know, once in a while, a Primaris lawyer wants to join our firm, so that's happened. but I'll mention that last. That's not a leading reason to be part of Primaris.
Thank you very much, Roger. I have about 200 follow-up questions, and maybe this panel will be so kind as to come back for another session. But to give the other panelists fair time, I have to move on to Jerry. So Jerry, you mentioned how you joined Kozacky Weitzel. How did you go from, you know, a lateral move to becoming a co-manager? Walk us through that path, co-managing partner. Walk us through that path for you.
Sure. So yeah, I joined Paul in 1998 after practicing for 5 years. And then, you know, worked as an associate for like the next 8 years. And, you know, use that time to do what you should do, right? In that time period of 5 to, you know, 13 years into your career of developing relationships and developing clients, right? So, and doing it largely the way that Roger described, right? Just networking groups, you know, reaching out to everybody I knew about the fact that I was at this firm and wanted to really grow my business and client base. And also just, doing, it's kind of cliche, but doing good work and getting other lawyers to know me and refer me work. To me, that's one of the, it's a compliment when, let's say, a lawyer that you were a co-counsel with on a case refers you work, but I feel like it's maybe the biggest compliment when it's a lawyer that you had a case against that then refers your work. Just doing good work and getting those kinds of referrals really helped. And then being able to do the same for them, right? Being able to, also refer work to them when I had a conflict situation or the like. And then became a partner in 2006. I, developed, my own client base and business and revenue enough to say, hey, Paul, I think it's time. And so we became partners on Flag Day of 2006 and celebrated every Flag Day since. And then, Paul is, I don't want to speak for him and say he's in the twilight of his career, but he's 41 years into practicing. He's definitely wants to slow down a bit. And so our firm has really two sort of separate groups, per se. So the firm name is Kozacky, Weitzel, McGrath. McGrath is Alistair McGrath, and his practice is almost exclusively insurance-based coverage and defense, mostly professional liability and employment practices liability. And so we have this title of co-managing partners because he needs to be the managing partner for his side of the firm, and I need to be for our side of the firm, which is really more business litigation, contract drafting, negotiation review, acting as outside general counsel to our small and medium-sized, closely held, and family-run businesses. And thereby taking away that need for Paul to be involved in the stuff that a managing partner does. So that's how it evolved.
Let me ask you this. It sounds like you have some niche areas that your individual partners really shine in, but they're different areas. I know Paul does a fair amount of maritime law. You mentioned insurance law, and you do more business-to-business litigation. How do you create a brand and identity when you've got kind of a lot of different areas all coming together under one house?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. You sent out those potential questions to ask, and it made me think, I don't think we really do focus on developing a brand, probably to our detriment, right? So that's not really our, I think of Roger and his firm, right? And first of all, Roger's got a great name to use for a firm, right? It's certainly catchier than Kozacky, Weitzel, McGrath, right? Or lots of the other names that our firms have for building a brand and brand awareness. So we really haven't, we just focus on, as I said, doing good work for our clients and, establishing relationships with them that hopefully, are sustainable over time. And then, that's how we've proceeded. And seeing that question made me think about whether or not that's something maybe we should focus on more, because I'm certain that there are benefits that come from doing that.
Well, I have a list that is infinitely long of things I should be doing and am not. Life is a matter of perfection and trying to get there as much as you can. Let me ask you this. I think you and Roger have both spoken to the value of word of mouth clients beget clients. You do good work for one client, you get recommended when that client's friend or someone in their network has a similar problem. Let me ask you a little bit about targeted marketing, which is something that I think I personally am very deficient in. And let me ask you, how much of your time do you spend thinking about what is the ideal client for me or for my firm, and actually going out and trying to get those clients rather than, you know, passive marketing where good work recommends itself to you in the future?
Sure. I would say I spend a little bit of time thinking about it and almost no time doing it.
Me too.
Yeah, I do spend, I do think about it, okay, I have these clients in this industry. There are industry-based groups that maybe I could be, getting involved in more, et cetera. But there's always that push and pull, right? Of how much time do you have? The things that I'm doing right now are working, right? Our firm has probably had the last 3 years have been the best years of our firm's existence, right? So it's, but I also recognize you also always have to be thinking, always have to be forward thinking, right? You have to think about, well, is that going to be sustainable, doing it this way? And maybe some more time should be spent on those other ideas that you just hit on, Ryan, that, and to sort of backstop in case the current methods stop working for whatever reason. So no, it's, as I said, I spend some time thinking about it, but not much time actually putting it into practice.
How about digital marketing? And that's something that I've had any number of firms tell us that we're missing out and not availing ourselves of an opportunity to really maximize our SEO or become, a trusted commentator in a space through active blogging and that sort of thing. Do you do a lot of that? Do you find it effective, or do you adopt a more traditional approach of face-to-face and personal connections as a way of growing business?
Yeah, so I'm not a big believer in the SEO type stuff for a firm like ours. I don't think that that's how the clients that we want would find us. Maybe once in a blue moon it would be effective. So I don't know that it's worth the time, expense, and effort of doing that. I think that there are, if I really had one area of practice that I focused on, let's say like John Pierce, oil and gas, right? Then I do think that there would be a benefit to me, being recognized in that field as something, as an expert, et cetera. My practice is so varied that I'm not really sure how to utilize that, right? So, I mean, I really represent clients in really every sort of industry that exists. And so, I mean, I think to the extent that I focus on sort of these two aspects of my practice, that I'm a trial lawyer. I actually try cases, which there are lots of, lawyers who don't. And so to me, that's something that I can really, tell clients. And that, that I have this somewhat maybe unique, or at least sort of unique aspect of my practice, which is that I do sort of both sides. I do counsel my clients on their contracts and, and drafting and negotiating them. And so doing that, I think, helps me litigate those contracts better. And I think litigating contracts helps me draft them better. And so that's really sort of my, again, my approach is, it's just, I think it'd be difficult. I suppose if I picked an area of practice that I really just wanted to focus on, but that isn't really of interest to me. I really, I enjoy doing different things every day. and working with different clients that have different businesses and learning about them. And so it's just never been a path for me that I've wanted to go down.
Thank you, Jerry. One last question, and then we'll get to Kylie. Can you talk a little bit about how your firm has used Primaris to grow your business, your connections, and your networks?
Yeah, so I'm the person that's primarily involved at our firm, right? And I try to participate as much as possible in not only the different groups, but the events, right? I mean, I unless I have some major conflict, I really try and go to everything that Primaris puts on for, you know, those in the PBLI, and getting to know the other lawyers in the group as well as I can. And then we do have an associate, Caitlin Brown, who I've told her I really want her to be the person at our firm to be involved in the young lawyers group and get as involved as she can, because young lawyers also start to develop business and have situations arise where they'll have things to contact her about, and it is also, of course, a benefit for us to know from Caitlin if there's something that we need to refer out, any relationships that she's developed at other Primaris firms. We do, I do, as often as it's relevant to a client, I promote the fact that we have access to really great lawyers, not only around the country, but around the world. Really try and push for that with our clients that have business in places other than Chicago. It's helped a few times to be able to do that in terms of getting business to other firms that I don't think would have ever gotten the business without that connection to us. And so, yeah, I really do think of Primaris first, and we've put that in our the heads of all the lawyers at our firm, that whenever there's a request or a need by a client elsewhere, or in a practice area that we don't do, that we need to reach out to a Primaris lawyer first about handling it.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Kylie, you've been so very patient. Thank you for that. And I have a number of questions for you, one of which stems from my ignorance of the personal injury field. But I do know that in our practice, it's vitally important to establish long-term relationships with businesses that become institutional clients and a steady source of business. I would gather that that's not something you can rely upon to the same extent that we can. So how do you go about and get business and repeat business, constantly new clients in an area where, someone gets hurt, personal injury, you hope they never get hurt again, and they're one-time clients?
It's definitely different. And it took me some time to figure this out and how to target appropriately to generate it. I mean, some of it is just your goodwill and your good work and spreading that out there. And you never know when the great big case might come in, big insurance, catastrophic injuries, that kind of case. And I thought a little bit about, okay, what are the last 3 significant cases that I generated personally? Where did those come from? One of them was the friend of a paralegal in our firm. She came to me because it was a Wyoming case and said, "Can you help her?" I said, "Yes." Established the relationship, got them signed up, and had a significant fee on that case. Number 2 was a referral from a former client, someone who had a family member that also had a personal injury. We had secured an exceptional settlement for the original case, and they were happy with the representation. So, I mean, similar in some respects to what Jerry and Roger said about the client relationships there. And then the third one, perhaps a plug for maintaining good relationships with former coworkers or whatever, a partner that supervised me in my first legal job. She was contacted by a former political figure who had a friend who knew someone who was very seriously hurt. And she's kind of phasing out of work, and she called me, and I took that case on and signed him up, and another significant settlement. So in the PI space, it's a lot different with respect to not having more of these targeted efforts towards businesses or folks that are really well connected. So I think I tend to be a little bit more spread across different areas. And one thing I found is helpful is being that go-to person for referrals, being the networker that can provide quality referrals to people. Whoever reaches out to me, I will find them a lawyer that is qualified and that I have a relationship with. And that in turn creates that goodwill where stuff comes back to me. So an example of this, not personal injury specific, but law school buddy of mine does family law, needed someone in London to help with an attachment issue on a property in London. Well, guess what? I know Ben, email Ben, make the introduction, and one of the associates at the firm in the UK is now coordinating with my friend, and he couldn't stop talking about how excellent they'd been when I went to his law firm open house last month. So I'd say there's a lot of different funnels. One thing that clicked for me was I needed to stop focusing on plaintiff specific bar type of stuff on a local basis to get the referrals. Fantastic when I was figuring out what to do. I needed to learn how to practice. I needed support amongst my peers. Not very good with peer referrals when they work in the same space. So instead, I've targeted that nationally, specific to plaintiff side work, and then have focused on some other stuff, like I've talked about, these relationship building in other ways.
That is very interesting. I sort of have a similar experience in that I've gotten involved more recently with the State Bar of Wisconsin, where I met people who do very different work. And that can be some of the most fertile basis of referrals and relationships. So
yes.
Some similar experience.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about digital marketing. With no offense to Roger and Jerry, you're younger than they are, and maybe more familiar with the latest devices. Do you use that in building business? Do you find it effective, or is it the same thing we've heard from Jerry and Roger? That's relationships.
Yes and no. I mean, we do SEO for our webpage. Of course, different types of cases. We want people coming in that are injured or have malpractice types of cases. And so I think it becomes a lot more necessary given our practice areas. I've used LinkedIn a lot. I've had referrals through my activity on LinkedIn, talking about speaking at conferences and articles I've written or results on our cases. I've had folks, especially being licensed in Wyoming and now practicing out of Jackson Hole, there's not a lot of law firms that have any kind of digital presence nationally. And so I found that's lent itself well to getting local counsel work where I'm in a state that's not as populated. And when I'm part of a larger firm that has a good web presence, that's legitimate and appears that way on first blush through, LinkedIn activity, through our webpage itself, that does a lot more for, say, a more sophisticated corporate client than your general practitioner in some rural county in the state. And so I think I've used it a bit to position myself as someone who can be trusted and is a legitimate quality lawyer in a space that's not quite saturated like New York City and Chicago.
Well, that's an excellent observation and angle. I know that certainly in my practice, you get that case as local counsel, and then when that client has an issue in your jurisdiction, you're the first call. So that's really an interesting insight. Let me ask you about your experience with Primaris, and I know you're a recent graduate of the Young Lawyers section. how have you used your experience with Primaris to help you build a book of business?
The goodwill, exchanging goodwill, being a person people can come to for those referrals in other jurisdictions and abroad, that's been huge. I mean, being willing to field those calls and helping these people out, I mean, keeps you top of mind. Then when they have a client that has a personal injury matter, you're how it comes in. I've certainly had cases that I've referred out to other Primaris members. I know there's been several folks that have reached out to me about it. I wouldn't, not yet, I'm sure it's coming, but no big significant cases yet. But at the same time, to me, it's the long game and learning when you're planting these seeds and you're watering these seeds over time, especially when your clients are, incident injury dependent situations. You have to have a lot more patience. At least I think so, rather than some of these instant results where maybe it's not so instant. It's not so instant. I mean, I remember Dan talking about courting a specific client over several years and lunches and whatnot, but it just seems to be it's less predictable. You don't quite have those steady flows and funnels that you would normally, and instead it's just go about your life, spread goodwill, do good work, be good to people, show up, make sure they're thinking about you, and when that case pops up, it's going to get sent over.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question I asked Roger, but from your perspective and in asking about challenges and difficulties, that the flip side of that is opportunities. As millennials, and I was at a conference the other day that pointed out that millennials are grandparents now, which I thought was very interesting. As millennials and Gen Z become more and more a part of the legal marketplace and a source of business, how do you think client acquisition is going to change, if at all, in terms of building a book of business with the next generation of clients?
One thing I've noticed from the plaintiff's perspective is we often get in these beauty contests where there's several law firms that people have called, someone's injured, and they're trying to decide, who am I going to go with? That is a skill. Closing those deals and getting them to choose you is a skill. And it's reading that person and saying what they need to understand the process and feel comfortable. I've seen younger lawyers struggling with that some in these situations. Perhaps it's COVID, perhaps it's more being constrained to digital platforms and not having as much face-to-face or phone communication and it more being text or email. But I think that is a skill that we need to be very aware needs to be developed in these younger generations coming in, because I think that's a weakness of these folks. And yes, it's person to person dependent. Some people are excellent at those kinds of things, but talking to people, using plain language, being down to earth, showing someone you don't have to prove that you're the smartest person in the room in the way that you talk, but it's how you make someone feel and how you make them feel comfortable with you as a lawyer. And you got to develop your own way to do that that's authentic and comfortable to you. But here's how I do it, and let's figure out the way for you to do it to be more effective in closing. And I see that being huge on the plaintiff side, where you're fielding these calls, and especially the really good cases, there's a lot of firms vying for them. And if you play it right, they're going to sign up with you. But I don't think those skills are coming as naturally to the younger generation, and perhaps firms that do recognize that and foster that, whether it be closing a business client or whatever kind of new person you have coming in the door, that could be one of the keys to longevity for a firm with continuing these business funnels that I think so many of us have worked so hard to foster and develop to keep the firm functioning and profitable.
Excellent advice. And we've come to the top of the hour. as great as this discussion has been, I feel like we've only scratched the surface on many things. So hopefully we can do this again without imposing too much on our panelists. Thank you very much, Kylie, Jerry, and Roger. This has been a very fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, and it's confirmed some of the things that I've been thinking about and worrying about. So I really appreciate all your insights, and hopefully we can explore this in even more detail in the future. So as stated at the top of the hour, the next networking event for the Developing Partner section is January 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern. The executive committee is meeting in late January to evaluate the success and areas we can focus on more in terms of our substantive programming. So be on the watch for that. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day, and appreciate the discussion.
Thanks, Ryan.
Everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.